Hello and welcome to Bridlington Christian Fellowship Online. We're going to be looking at Joshua chapter 2, so let me read that for you now. Then Joshua son of Nun secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim. Look over the land, he said, especially Jericho. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. The king of Jericho was told, "Look, some Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land." So the king of Jericho sent this message to Rahab: "Bring out the men who came to you and entered your house, because they have come to spy out the whole land." But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. She said, "Yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they had come from. At dusk, when it was time to close the city gates, the men left. I don't know which way they went. Go after them quickly. You may catch up with them." But she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them under the stalks of flax she'd laid out on the roof. So the men set out in pursuit of the spies on the road that leads to the fords of the Jordan, and as soon as the pursuers had gone out, the gate was shut. Before the spies lay down for the night, she went up on the roof and said to them, "I know that the Lord has given this land to you, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the 2 kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts sank, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family, because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death." "Our lives for your lives," the men assured her. "If you don't tell what we are doing, we will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us the land." So she let them down by a rope through the window, for the house she lived in was part of the city wall. Now she had said to them, "Go to the hills, so that the pursuers will not find you. Hide yourselves there 3 days until they return, and go on your way." The men said to her, "This oath you made us swear will not be binding on us, unless when we enter the land you have tied this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, and unless you have brought your father and mother, your brothers, and all your family into your house. If anyone goes outside your house into the street, his blood will be on his own head. We will not be responsible. As for anyone who is in the house with you, his blood will be on our head if a hand is laid on him. But if you tell what we are doing, we will be released from the oath you made us swear." "Agreed," she replied. "Let it be as you say." So she sent them away, and they departed, and she tied the scarlet cord in the window. When they left, they went into the hills and stayed there 3 days, until the pursuers had searched all along the road and returned without finding them. Then the 2 men started back. They went down out of the hills, forded the river, and came to Joshua son of Nun and told him everything that had happened to them. They said to Joshua, "The Lord has surely given the whole land into our hands. All the people are melting in fear because of us." Well, last Sunday we began to look at the first 6 chapters of Joshua. They're a great source of God's encouragement, strength and help for us, both in the difficult circumstances that we're currently having to live through, and also for us as we look to the future. The challenge for us is to prepare now for what God may send tomorrow, as we look to his leading and guidance for life beyond lockdown. Now in chapter 1, God calls us to be strong and courageous and trust solely in him. Now in chapter 2, God calls us to be alert as we seek to live for him in the present and go forward into the future that he is preparing for us. Being and staying alert is something that we're all familiar with. In the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, the government are telling us this: the most important thing we can do is to stay alert, control the virus, and in doing so, save lives. Now, the Cambridge Dictionary defines the word alert as being quick to see, understand, and act in a particular situation. Now, this is true for everyone as we deal with coronavirus, but it's also true for us as Christians. Not only do we need to be alert for what's going on around us, but vitally, we need to be alert to how God is at work so that we can respond to this as he leads us. Joshua chapter 2 is a wonderful illustration of how we should be alert to these things. The chapter opens with Joshua secretly sending 2 spies from the camp of Israel over to the west side of the River Jordan with these instructions: go, look over the land, especially Jericho. Now, the reason that Joshua does that is so that when the people of Israel cross the River Jordan to take possession of the land that God is giving to them, he is alert to what the land is like and what is going on there. The spies return to Joshua at the end of chapter 2, and they were able to bring him a tremendously positive report. The Lord has surely given the whole land into our hands. All the people are melting in fear because of us. Now, this upbeat assessment of Jericho and the surrounding land is because of the lady who hosted the spies, Rahab. And Rahab is someone you wouldn't necessarily have associated the Israelites with. She's a pagan from Jericho, and she is a prostitute. Yet going into her home would provide a good cover for these spies because of all the men from outside the city who would visit. In Rahab, though, it would seem hard to find anyone who could be further from God. However, Rahab has a surprise for us. She is alert to how God is working for his people now. I know that the Lord has given this land to you, she says in verse 9. She's alert to what God has done for his people in the past. We've heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt. She is also alert to who God is. The Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. Well, this breathtaking response is a declaration of faith that, as she's been aware of what God has done, she's realised just who God is and has believed in him. It can only be explained by saying that God himself has opened Rahab's eyes to the spiritual realities and that he's been at work in her heart, directing her to put her trust in him alone. But God has also done something else. He's called Rahab to be alert to what will happen when Israel are on the doorstep of Jericho, and to put her faith into action. And it's for this reason that we see Rahab respond with such presence of mind when the spies arrive. What seemed like a good cover for spying was actually what we might call a divine appointment, that is, a meeting of people so that God's purposes might be fulfilled through them. Rahab's response then to this divine appointment is to protect these men at all costs, as we see from verses 2 to 7. The king of Jericho has heard that the spies are at Rahab's house, and he sends her an order that they must be brought out. But Rahab has already hidden them under stalks of flax that she's laid out on the roof of her house, and she misdirects the king's men by telling them that she didn't know where the men had come from, and that they had left her when it was time to close the city gate at dusk. She adds, "Go after them quickly, you may catch up with them," which of course sends off the king's men on a wild goose chase towards the fords of Jordan, which is the most likely crossing point of the river for the spies to return to Israel's camp. Next she goes to the spies and she explains to them that why she's done what she's done for them is because she's put her trust in their God. She then takes a further step of faith as she says to them, "Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family, because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death." Well, the spies agree to this, and Rahab also agrees to accept the provisos that they give to her, so that she and her family can be saved. This includes tying a scarlet cord to the window of her house so that she and her family can be identified and saved from destruction. And Rahab acts to do this straight away. Rahab advises the spies on how to evade capture from the king's men who were pursuing them, and let them down by a rope through the window, for the house she lived in was part of the city wall, so that these men could escape. All of this is a remarkable response of faith from Rahab. She'd been alert to what the God of Israel was doing and responded by trusting in him. Now she places her life and the lives of her family into the hands of the spies because she is confident that as they were God's representatives, that she is placing her trust in the God of Israel's hands through them. The writer of the letter to the Hebrews states, "By faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient." And now we turn to the spies themselves to see how they were alert to how God was working in Jericho and the surrounding area, and how they responded to what they found there. The spies had entered the house of Rahab as somewhere that seemed to give them good cover, but there they met with something quite remarkable and unexpected. As we've already seen, in the house of this pagan prostitute, they found that God had gone ahead of them, and that this lady had already put her trust in the God of Israel. In fact, the truth of this was revealed to them by the way in which she treated them. She hid them from the king of Jericho. She helped them to escape down the city wall, and she gave them the advice to go and hide in the hill country for 3 days until their pursuers had returned, and only then head back to the camp of Israel. She also gave them the welcome news that, having heard how God had helped the Israelites to cross the Red Sea and defeat the kings of the Amorites, all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. Now, if all that wasn't astonishing enough, Rahab asked them to make an oath before God that they would spare her and her family for the kindness that she'd shown to them. Just as she'd revealed that her kindness was because she trusted in their God, so their response showed that they were alert to God going ahead of them and working in people's hearts and lives. The spies respond to Rahab's request by making this promise. "Our lives for your lives," the men assured her. "If you don't tell what we are doing, we will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us the land." Now this oath, though, comes with certain wise provisos, And that's not because they don't trust Rahab. What these conditions mean is that it is all the more likely that the oath will be fulfilled. The spies ask Rahab to tie a scarlet cord in her window, through which her home can be readily identified. They also insist that all her family are brought into her house, as they give her this solemn warning: if anyone goes outside your house into the street, his blood will be on his own head. We will not be responsible. As for anyone who is in the house with you, his blood will be on our head if a hand is laid on him. Finally, they tell her that the oath will be broken if she tells anyone what they were doing in Jericho. So the spies are responding to Rahab in trust, and this is shown as they are faithful to her instructions to go into the hill country for 3 days, and only then to make the journey back to Israel's camp. When the spies returned, they went straight to Joshua, son of Nun, and told him everything that had happened to them. And in verse 24 they emphasise the fear of the people of Jericho. But this is to bring a message of encouragement that God has certainly gone before them, and that the Lord has surely given the whole land into our hands. We too can know encouragement as we look towards future days. In Joshua, God's intention for his people in the future is that they possessed his promised land. But for us, his intention in the future is that we possess life with him forever. And just as God went ahead of the Israelites to prepare the way for them to possess the promised land, so he goes ahead of us to prepare the way for us to inherit his eternal life. This way is through Jesus, who came into the world as God, his Father's one true way of dealing with the disobedience or sin against God, which all of us have in our hearts and that's revealed in our lives. This sin deserves only God's angry judgment and punishment, but Jesus went ahead of us to provide a way for us to be saved from this. Jesus allowed himself to be taken and to be put to death on a cross, where he met with God's judgment as he stood in the dock of God's court in our place. The guilty verdict for our sin was pronounced on him, and he took God's punishment for it in full. This means that for all those who trust in him, their sin can be forgiven and they can be reconciled to God and have a real relationship with him. If you have never trusted in Jesus, then the same can be true for you too. Through Jesus, you can begin a new relationship with God as you trust and follow him from your heart and with your life. If you've never asked Jesus to forgive your sin, then I would urge you to make sure that you do that today. Well, as amazing as this is, the wonderful news for everyone who trusts in Jesus is that the forgiveness of our sin is not the end of what Jesus has gone ahead of us to do. Jesus rose again from the dead and returned to heaven, and he has this message for everyone who trusts and follows him. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God. Trust also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. I am going there to prepare a place for you. Jesus has gone ahead of us to heaven to prepare our place with him to be forever. It's a truly wonderful hope for the future that all who trust in him have to look forward to. Joshua 2 is a wonderful illustration of the importance for us to be alert to God being at work and being prepared to respond to him. We see this in Joshua, in the Israelite spies, and most wonderfully in Rahab. There's a lot to encourage us to live for God in the present and to go forward into the future that he is preparing for us as we continue to be alert to the opportunities that he gives us. God calls us to be alert to what's going on in our world, our country, and our community. And as we've seen in Joshua 2, this is all about looking to see how God is at work. On the 22nd of May, the Guardian newspaper reported that, according to a survey carried out by the Christian aid agency Tearfund, a quarter of adults in the UK had watched or listened to a religious service since the coronavirus lockdown began, and that 1 in 20 had started to pray. The article goes on to say the findings of the poll reinforce indications of an increase in the numbers of people turning to faith for succour amid uncertainty and despair. In a recent article posted on the Fellowship of Independent Evangelical Churches FIEC website, the pastor of North Church in Leicester writes about how God is at work during lockdown. He says, "Sharing the gospel with those around us has changed, but it continues by God's grace. We have found that friends have been more open than usual to a text or phone call asking how we should be praying for them and sharing our hope. We've had some good conversations with immediate neighbours, one asking for a Bible to read, and we have had a handful of unbelievers every week join in the Sunday live stream. We take heart that Jesus has not ditched his promise to be with us to the end of the age as we seek to make disciples." We thank God that we too know of similar examples in our own fellowship. But we also need to heed a warning. In Matthew 16, Jesus warns the Jewish religious leaders about their lack of spiritual alertness. They could look at the evening sky and predict what the weather was going to be like in the same sort of way that we say red sky at night, shepherd's delight, red sky in the morning, shepherd's warning. But they couldn't see how God was at work in their own community. They could not see that in Jesus, God was present among them. We must not be like these religious leaders and need to ask God to open our spiritual eyes so that we can understand and be alert to the signs of the times and respond to them. In our response to these times, are we earnestly praying for God to work in people's hearts and minds so that they are open to receive his message of salvation and that he will give us opportunities to share our faith with others? Are we earnestly seeking to share the good news of Jesus through conversations, through giving out gospel literature, or through directing people to Bible teaching online? We need to make sure that we are alert to what is going on around us and how God is working. We need to be praying for him to be at work in the present so that as we move forward with him, we can respond in his strength to what he has done in various lives and situations to his glory. Everything that we've been thinking about in Joshua 2 should encourage us that God is going ahead of us to prepare the ground for work he wants us to do, whether that's as individuals or as a church. We are called to prayerful trust in him so that we remain alert to his opportunities in the present and we can respond to the circumstances and situations of the future, knowing that he has provided them for us and that through our work and witness he will be glorified. Amen.